welcome to the Aligned CEO podcast. My name is Emily Fisher, and I'm your host and the founder of the Aligned CEO. I'm a mindset expert and a business strategist who likes helping brand new entrepreneurs start their business in a way that builds the life of their dreams. All right, so today I want to talk to you about how we can use the energy of the new year in order to plan our year in a way that really aligns with who we are as a person, what our strengths are, and helps us achieve our goals. So I tested this process over the last few years, but really intensively over the last year. I worked on it. I checked in every single month, quarter, week, and made sure that I was updating it to make it something that was not only easy and intuitive, but really kept me on track for achieving my goals. I'm having more fun. I'm working less hours. I know this sounds too good to be true. Honestly, it's just been the work of being more effective, being more efficient, and then using this strategy to make sure I'm actually doing things that move the needle forward. This year, what I'm taking on, that's the kind of the next level of this process, is actually doing the things that I tend to want to avoid. Towards the end of the year, last year, I found that those things that we avoid the most are usually the things that actually create the quantum leaps or the quick leaps forward, the massive changes that we so desperately want. I remember hearing a quote recently on this note, actually briefly, that was like, the satisfaction and fulfillment you desire is on the other side of the work you avoid doing. So I'm taking that on this year, and again, I'm deepening this process that I've created over the past few years for having a level of openness, flow, and abundance. So that is what we're talking about. And bring up my notes. So, one thing I want to start with before we jump into the whole episode, I actually really want to take a moment to just be wherever you're at, right? Like, I was thinking back to me doing this process for the first time last year. Last year, I was leaving my 9-to-5 job. For those of you who don't know, I started my business in 2020. I moved across the state. I had a bunch of life stuff going on, some health challenges after COVID, and I ended up getting a job for about a year. I have a fabulous blog on that about how it was absolutely the right choice for me at the time. I'm so grateful that I did it, and it was still really hard. So I knew that this is what I wanted to be doing. So anyway, that's a whole thing. But this time last year, I was leaving that job. I was about to start my business again, and I had so much emotional baggage going into the year. I felt really overwhelmed from the holidays, and honestly, I had a lot of that failure from the first round of my business still like kind of weighing down my energy. So just being transparent about that, that's something I really had to work through. And if that's where you're at right now, or if you're in any place of being up in your feelings or being kind of bummed out because of the weather, that is totally fine. That's a perfect place to be as well. And you're still in the right place right now. You're on the right path, listening to this, starting to take these actions, even if it doesn't feel 100% just yet. So I wanted to say that, but let's all kind of start this episode by just being where we're at. So how are you feeling, right? Check in with what emotions are coming up for you, not only in the process of this episode, but just in your body, in your life lately. Yesterday, I did this exercise while driving, and I was really surprised how many emotions were coming up for me, right? Like there was excitement. Of course, there's gratitude, there's fulfillment and satisfaction. But when I asked myself this question, honestly, I also had feelings of some sadness and some grief of past years and some overwhelm and all these other things. And when we make space for all those emotions and we're not repressing them, we're not trying to pretend they aren't there, I have found that allows them to all just kind of resolve. It allows them to be seen and heard and present and processed. And then we can create from a place that isn't avoiding or running away from everything that we're unwilling to feel or be with. Now we can start this episode from a place of a little more presence, a little more awareness, and creation. So let's jump in. First of all, I want to say that on this podcast, I am going to be kind of riffing on my planning process and give you some tips, give you an overview of how, when I was working in business development and as a project manager, we went about planning for the year. If you want more detail, this is not going to be a 5-hour-long podcast. So if you want more detail on all of this, I am going to be hosting a business planning workshop on January 15th. I will put the details for that in the show notes. So today, let's go ahead and jump in on what is business planning, why does it matter, just kind of that kind of brief introductory overview. When I talk about business planning, what I mean is creating a vision for your year that can then be translated into goals, milestones, tasks, and then actions. So oftentimes when we only have a vision, what happens is we'll have this like really grand vision. It seems so far away. It seems very intangible. And we often will just like take random actions hoping that we get closer to that vision. This doesn't work very well. It leads to frustration. It can lead to a lot of time wasted, right? Like we've all been there at some point. When you are trying to accomplish a goal, what becomes very clear on a small scale is that there is a goal and then there are milestones, and each of those milestones have steps to them. No matter how complex a project is, that is the case. There's an objective, there are milestones that let you know that you're working your way towards that objective, and then there are tasks that lead you to each of those milestones, right? So we're working from the goal backwards. And in this business planning workshop, and what I would encourage you to do as well, is the same thing. So start with your vision for the year, and really, like, while you're listening to the podcast, I really want you to start imagining what would be so fun if it happened this year. Like, what would make this the best year of your life? What would make this the best year ever? And one place you can look for that might come to you naturally, but one place you can look for that too is looking back on last year. What went really well that you'd actually like to see more of? What were some of the things from last year that really excited you, had you feel really fulfilled, really kind of lit you up? What were those things? What circumstances were they in? What scenarios caused that? And start to let that inform, okay, coming in the next year, how can I create more of that? Now that might be income based, right? Like it's really fun to have a big month, to sign new contracts, to hit new income goals. And so that might be something that you translate into this year, but it also might not be. You know, a lot of what I have seen in the last year for myself, my high moments are connecting with new clients that I absolutely love working with, or meeting new people that are just my kind of people, right? Like we can go in those deep conversations. We can talk about tarot cards and spirituality and everything else pretty comfortably. We can go to new depths of, I love talking about like what it means to be a human being, you know? And I know that's not for everyone, but when I get to have those conversations, it really lights me up. So in the coming year, knowing that for myself, it allows me to be a little more free in my marketing, a little more clear and direct, that when I'm making these podcasts, when I'm putting out content on social media, that's really who I want to be speaking to, is people who can go to that depth, people who enjoy that, people who find it intriguing. Because when we get into a session, first of all, they know what they're going to get, right? Like they know that that's kind of part of my expertise. It's part of what I bring to the table, and they're getting the full value of what I have to offer. But also those sessions just become more fun for me. Like my dream year definitely involves working with clients that I adore and can't wait to get on the phone with. So that's part of what that exercise, looking back and then creating more of it in my future, has allowed me to accomplish. So again, as you're imagining it, it can be really helpful to look back on the past year, look at the things that were like highlights for you, see how you can create a little bit more of that, look at what really lit you up. Now, if you are looking at your last year and it was just garbage and there was so much that you just want less of in your future, that's also very informing, right? I love the expression that polarity creates clarity. So look at the things that you don't want and allow that to inform, okay, so first of all, we might want less of that this year, but we're not just going to run away from that, okay? There's really no power in us just avoiding things or running away from things, but there is a lot of power in saying, okay, for me, I don't like working in an office. So what do I do want? Well, I do want the flexibility to work from home or a coffee shop or the library or wherever I feel like working that day. Great. So that gives me something to work towards. I'm working towards having a laptop lifestyle, right? So the same thing. If you look at last year and you had a lot of drama in your life, okay, well, great. You don't want any more drama in your life. Maybe you can set better boundaries. Maybe you can reprioritize your time or the people that are in your life. Start looking at what the opposite of that is, not from a place of getting away from what you didn't like, but just giving that polarity of what would it be like to have something other than that? What would it be like? What do I actually want? And what is that informing me of that I do want in my life? So that's another awesome place to look for that as well. Now, something that we want to keep in mind. This is the visioning part of the business planning process. And I really want to open your mind a little bit to being creative, like being maybe a little bit maybe a little bit unreasonable. Okay, so rather than saying like, yeah, okay, I did $6,000 last month, so I could probably do like 6,200 this month, something like that, right? Really come at it from a place of, I don't necessarily know the extent of what is possible. So in this phase of the process, we'll get to that, right? Like we're going to get to the more reasonable, logical planning, scheduling portion of this, especially in the workshop. But for right now, dream big, right? Like what do you actually want? If anything were possible, and if it wasn't your job to make it happen, what would you want? Do you want a nicer home? Do you want a better connection with your partner? Do you want to reach 100,000 more people in your business? Do you want an online course? Do you want to raise your prices? If no one were offended and you couldn't mess it up, what would you actually want? This is probably one of the most important questions that we need to ask ourselves. And again, where I see people making mistakes is honestly dreaming, and I do this too, by the way, so I'm not just like looking outwards on this. I've had to do some work around this, is just dreaming too small, especially when we look at the course of 1 year. So what you might do is actually look at what you want to accomplish over the next 10 years. What happens when we do that is our brain gets a little bit lost in the time frame. So rather than saying, what we'll do is like, well, I know how long a day is, and I know what's reasonable to accomplish in a day, so I'm gonna like cut my dreams down to size. And we do the same thing with months, sometimes to a lesser degree with quarters, and to a lesser degree with years. But when we look at what we want to accomplish over 10 years, our brain isn't as good at that. You know, imagine where you were 10 years ago in your life and how much has changed between now and then. I don't know about for you, but for me, everything has changed. Everything has changed. Okay, so I could go on and on. I built a fabulous business that I adore. I have the most incredible partnership with my current partner. I have a house that I own and that we're renovating and having a blast with. Like my hobbies are different. My job is different. Everything is different in my life than it was a decade ago. So when I look forward a decade, if I want to imagine it, well, in that, based off of that, anything could happen in the next 10 years. Well, that allows us to kind of collapse that timeline. So maybe you can dream about it at a 10-year level and then start putting those goals like and dreams just into your life of like, well, how would I make that happen? We can start bringing that into the 1 year time frame. Okay, I hope that's not too confusing because I want to move on and actually talk a little bit as well about how those big dreams and desires then get translated into our actions. And again, the tangible step-by-step of this, I'm going to be teaching in the workshop. So I'm not going to go into that quite as much now. For the podcast, what I really want to kind of double down on is this idea of dreaming big, really releasing yourself from the constraints and limitations of what you believe might be possible for you or what was possible for you in the past. And then I want you to create a little bit of space for just imagining, for imagination, creation, right? Allowing yourself to be worthy of your biggest desires. This is another aspect of this process that is so important and is often overlooked is if you have something going on where you're like, well, I really want to generate $1 million in revenue, but I really don't need that much, and maybe I won't even spend it. I don't know what to do with it. Like, what if I lost it all? How much work would that take? So look exactly at like, you had this desire, and then all of a sudden your brain is like causing a bunch of noise, and then you're just going to pare that down. Well, you might not get necessarily very excited about that goal that you pared down. Like if the idea of your desire of making $1 million excites the crap out of you, and you are like, well, let's be reasonable. Like it's my first couple years in business. Like maybe I'll bring that down to 30,000. Does that excite the crap out of you? Like, are you going to jump out of bed in the morning and be looking for ways to make $30,000 this year? Like, maybe you are. And if so, that's great. But look for that level of your goal where it's not so high that you actually cannot fathom it being reasonable, but it is high enough that it actually does excite you. And you're like, wow, if I were playing a game right now, if I wasn't like emotionally attached to this outcome and I were playing a game of making this amount of money this year, would that excite you, or would it just be like a standard? Or would it be discouraging? So start to think about that. And as a bonus, little bonus on that, notice what those thoughts are that come up and have you play small. So this is the year, you guys, that those thoughts are not going to hold you back anymore. So much of the work that I do with my clients, honestly, so I started this as a business strategist. I started teaching as someone who would come in and help you build a strategy for your business. So much of what I do now, and what I honestly love the most to do, is that work of like, okay, great, we have this awesome strategy. Now, what are those thoughts telling you that this won't work? Or it's not worth trying because it won't turn out? Or that you're not the kind of person that does that? Like, what are those thoughts? Where are they coming from? And this is the year, you guys, I'm creating this for you right now, that those don't hold you back anymore. That those thoughts can be there and you can still create whatever your desires are. Or those thoughts can still be there and all they are opportunities to let go of things that no longer serve you, to let go of the past that used to define what you were capable of. This can be that year for you. So that is what I'm creating for you guys. I really hope that all of that has made sense. I know I'm covering a lot very quickly. This is something that I get ridiculously excited about. And so, so I hope that that's just like coming across clearly, not only my enthusiasm for it, but I want this to be your best year ever. It's important that it is, and it's important that we pursue our best year ever, right? When we just pursue a good year, when we just pursue getting by, like, look, I've been there. I've been there before. You know, again, some of you have heard this story, but when I was going through like the darkest times in my life after my head injury, and when I really was in a place of just getting by, a podcast like this would have been really difficult for me to listen to. I could not have created it for sure, but it would have been difficult for me to listen to because honestly, I couldn't imagine something other than getting by. Now that I'm looking back, I can see that this reality that I'm living right now was available to me all along. Like, it was in my future the whole time. And that I needed to go through that part of the process as well. It was okay that I was struggling. It was okay that I was getting by. Like, that was enough at that time in my life. And there was so much more available to me. One of the reasons I'm recording this is for everyone who's super stoked about the new year. You're going to get a lot out of this. Don't get me wrong. Like, there's a lot in this podcast that is not only very valuable. I've used it myself. I've used it for clients. People are getting really stoked, which is great. We're creating a lot of cool stuff in my world right now. But I also am creating this podcast for those of you who are listening from a place where you're either just getting your feet under you or you're not even quite there yet. And you're just looking for the space for this to be the year that you're allowed to thrive. That this might be a year that's different than the past. And that's okay. You're perfect wherever you're at right now. So that's all I have to say for this podcast. I know this is a fairly short one, but there's a lot to digest. So feel free to listen to it again, go through it with a journal, maybe listen to some of these prompts, and check out that business planning workshop that I'm posting in the show notes. It's going to be, oh my gosh, it's going to be this energy, but so much more. And we're going to walk through the whole process of taking this vision that you're creating. I'll give you a few other journal prompts and tools in order to create your vision, and then kind of turning that vision into a reality into a strategy, and then tangible steps that you can take over the next year to have your best year ever. So let me know what you think. You can always connect with me over on Instagram at align_CEO or by email at support@thealignedceo.com. And I cannot wait to see what you do.